The silence and the fury draws ever closer, and it's looking like it's going to be a lot of fun. The Beastmen rework looks fantastic, and it seems they will finally have received the attention they deserved. A big shout out to Alan, who is the lead designer on the Beastmen rework. You can see he loves his job, and his enthusiasm and love for the Beastmen certainly shines through. As cool as the changes for the Beastmen are though, today we are discussing the Dawi. With the reveal that the upcoming FLC Lord will be a dwarf, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at their language and their runes, along with the changes to runes that are coming with the update. So without further waffle, let's dive in to the language of the Dwarfs. Over the millennia, the language of the Dwarfs, Khazalid, has changed very little. There are few words which have been adopted from races of man or elf, as the resistance to change is strong, with the sense of history and tradition being of utmost importance to Dwarven culture. While the Dwarves have been reticent to include concepts and ideas from other cultures, the reverse has not been true, with the language of men having many words which have origins in Khazalid. The professions of mining and metalworking are good examples where men have used the terms of the Dwarfs or built upon them. The Dwarven language is spoken freely amongst the Dwarfs when in the company of their own race, but they rarely speak it when other races are within earshot, unless on the field of battle, where war cries and curses in Khazalid can be heard. The preoccupations of the Dawi are clearly present in their language, as there are hundreds of different ways to describe rocks, tunnels, and precious metals and gems. Gold, depending on its luster, colour, purity, and density, has more than 100 different words to describe it, and when dwarfs sit around the hearth of an evening to share a meal or a pint of Bugman's, it's very common for them to sing the Gold Song, where every dwarf takes it in turns to sing a different verse. Each new contestant must use a different word for gold when singing their verse, and if a dwarf should repeat a word already used, or stumble as they are unable to think of a new term, they must pay a forfeit, usually shouting the whole company a round of ale. Some games can last for hours, with older dwarfs able to draw from a large vocabulary. In some cases, if a dwarf cannot think of a term, it is not unheard of for them to try and use a new word, which, if it goes unchallenged, can be adopted as yet another word for gold. If the ale is flowing freely, then dwarves can be quite boisterous and jovial, a stark contrast to their usual demeanour, where they use their words sparingly. As a rule, a dwarf says what he means, and means what he says. Apart from their language, the dwarves have a well-defined runic script that originated as carvings on stone, which explains why the symbols are all made up of straight lines and fairly simple, hence easy to cut with a chisel. Apart from specific runes for sounds, there are also many runes for ideas, objects, or locations. For the uninitiated, this can be quite confusing, but it provides for a great deal of flexibility. To add to the complexity, runes can have many meanings. For example, the dwarf word for men is umgi, yet it also means shoddy work or poorly constructed. To a dwarf, man-made is seen as a huge insult and a damning criticism of their work. Runes are often found etched on a dwarf warrior's weapons or armour, often denoting their clan, as dwarves proudly proclaim their family bonds and identity. Runes can also be found on banners to mark a particularly heinous grudge that the clan seeks to avenge. Apart from the standard runes, there are numerous magic runes whose great power can only be controlled by the runesmiths. These individuals can take a simple hammer and empower it with all manner of magics that can help their clans in battle. As the dwarves abhor using magic like other races, this compromise is extremely important to the performance of the Garaz Angkor in battle. Before we explore some of these magical runes, let's take a look at some of the words in the dwarf lexicon, which will help you to interpret some dwarf names you might encounter. A gruel, a stone carving or the lines in the face of a very old dwarf. Unlike humans, who may take offence at the mention of their age and wrinkles, the dwarfs consider this, a lined face with deep cracks, a sign of wisdom and honour. Angkor, meaning domain or realm. a term we should all be familiar with for the Dwarven Empire. Asgal, a hoard of treasure, sometimes referring to a rich seam of untapped metals or gems. Something every dwarf would love to find. Azul, a metal of any kind, a dependable or sturdy dwarf. One wonders if the dwarfs of Karak Azul are called as such because they are dependable and sturdy and can always be called upon by the High King in times of need. Bok, banging your head on the roof of a low tunnel, characteristic scar on the forehead caused by the same action. Bolg, a large fat belly, also a state of extreme wealth, age and contentment. Bryn, gold which shines strikingly in the sunlight, or any object that shines as such. Chuff, a piece of very old cheese that a dwarf miner keeps under his hat for emergencies. Some might say that the legend of Total War could indeed have chuff somewhere on his person. Damaz, a grievance, grudge or insult to be avenged. Dongliz, the parts of a dwarf body that are impossible for him to scratch. Drek, far, a great distance, a great ambition or enterprise. Drongnel, dragon stew with cave mushrooms, marinated in a strong ale, a particular treat for some dwarves. Ekrund, a stairway descending beneath the ground. Elgraz, construction that looks as if it's about to collapse, possibly man-made. Galaz, gold of particular ornamental value. Gibal, fragments of food enmeshed in a dwarf's beard, something I can relate to when I get butter from my toast stuck in my beard. Ginit, small stone which has worked its way into your boot, causing discomfort. Gorl, gold which is especially soft and yellow, or the colour yellow. Gorog, ale, to be in high spirits, or a drinking binge or pub crawl. Nolengrom, respect due to a dwarf who has a longer and more spectacular beard. Grindal, long flaxen plaits worn by a dwarf maiden, can be quite fetching. Grisdal, ale which has been fermented for at least a century. Highly sought, especially if bugmans. Grobkaz, goblin work or evil deeds. Grog, inferior or watered ale, a mannish brew. Dwarfs don't like drinking in human taverns, as they consider all the ales of man to be grog, nowhere near the quality of bugman's brew. Grumbak, a short measure of ale, a trivial complaint or grumble. Grugni, dwarf ancestor, the god of mines and smiths. Hazkal, an ale brewed recently, or a fiery young warrior. Kadrin, a mountain pass. Karag, a volcano or a barren mountain. Konk, gold which is ruddy in colour, a large bulbous nose. Krut, a discomforting disease contracted from mountain goats. One wonders how the disease is contracted. Kruti, a dwarf suffering from Krut, a goat herder, or an insult. Nagrand, an area of great upheaval, devastation, or industry. Ricket, a small stone that falls on your head as you walk down a tunnel. Roots, slackness of bowels caused by drinking too much ale, gives a new meaning to he can't hold his drink. Scruff, a scrawny beard, an outrageous insult. Throng, an army, a huge assembly of dwarves, or a clan. Trom, a beard, respect due to age or experience. Ungrim, a dwarf who has not yet fulfilled an important oath, an untrustworthy dwarf. Urk, an orc or enemy. Wanaz, a disreputable dwarf with an unkempt beard, an insult. Wazok, a dwarf who has exchanged gold or some other valuable item for something of little or no value. A foolish or gullible dwarf, an insult. Weret, a dwarf who has forgotten where he placed his tankard of ale, a state of befuddlement. So, there we have a selection of the dwarf vocabulary, some of which may seem familiar, as we will have seen them or heard them in Warhammer 2. I just love how there are so many insults that relate to having a small beard, or insults toward the shoddy construction of men. Very fitting. Let's move on to the runes. The dwarves do not wield magic in the traditional sense, and have no spellcasters as other races. This is not some fluke or accident, but by design, as the dwarves have long seen the winds of magic as fickle at best and corrupting at worst. It was Grungni, the dwarf ancestor god, who first learned the art of binding magical energies with his hammercraft, and forging the power into solid rock and metal. Since those days, the runesmiths have learned the art of striking magic runes, and have passed their secrets on to the younger generations. The entire dwarf language can be represented in runes, carved in stone or metal, but it is the magic runes of the runesmiths, far more potent and crucial to dwarf armies on the battlefield, that carry the most weight. Let's take a look at some of the runes which are established in the 8th edition of the Dwarf Army Book. They can come in several flavours, from weapon runes, armour runes and banner runes, to talismanic runes or engineering runes. Master Rune of Scalaf Blackhammer. Runesmith Scalaf forged many hammers of great might, and some maintain that the legendary Hammer of Sigmar, Gal Maraz, was his work. A weapon engraved with this rune will wound any foe not wearing magical armour. The Master Rune of Breaking. Runesmiths take particular delight in the sound of inferior works of other races breaking like icicles beneath a hammer blow. A weapon engraved with this rune will cause any foe's magical weapon to break on contact. Master Rune of Alaric the Mad. No one knows what happened to Alaric the Mad after he forged the famous rune fangs for the Elector Counts of the Empire, though some say he crafted rune weapons for the Khan Queens of Kislev. Armour is useless against any weapon engraved with this rune. Master Rune of Snorri Spanglehelm. Runesmith to the High King during the time of Kalon Vikramson. Such is the awesomeness of his work that it still brings tears to a runesmith's eyes. A weapon engraved with this rune has an increased chance to hit its target. Master Rune of Adamant. The Master Rune of Adamant makes its wearer harder than granite, and more impervious to damage than steel. A warrior wearing armour engraved with this rune is incredibly tough and able to shrug off even the most serious of blows. The Rune of Preservation. When Prince Valkan Firehand was decapitated by a white blade at the Battle of Hunger Wood, a runesmith created this rune to offer greater protection from such evils in the future. Armour engraved with this rune grants the wearer a ward save against killing blows. So there is but a small selection of some of the runes in the 8th edition Army Book, of which there are dozens and dozens. In both games 1 and 2, the runic arts are not well represented. However, that is all about to change, with the FLC coming alongside the Silence and the Fury. We are due to receive an additional Dwarf Lord, the legendary Thoric Ironbrow, the Master Rune Lord of Karak Azul. His inclusion sees the addition of runes added to the Forge mechanic, where the player can create runes that can be assigned to units to provide increased prowess in battle and unique abilities. Runesmiths will also have access to runes in battle in the same manner that spellcasters of other races do. However, the runes do not rely on the winds of magic and instead have long cooldowns to avoid spamming. Of the runes that we can look forward to, there is the reworked Rune of Negation, which now provides 40% damage resistance to the target unit. There is the reworked Rune of Oath and Steel, which increases the armor of allies within 100 meters of the target by a whopping 30. There is the amazing rework for the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, which is an area of effect explosion that causes fire damage. Bunch up your enemies around one of your characters, and then let loose with this rune and watch them melt. Very cool. These are joined by new runes, such as the Rune of Breaking, which increases armor piercing damage and base weapon damage for the target unit. At the same time, it also causes armor sundering for a short period on enemies hit. There's the aptly named Rune of Speed, which confirms that dwarves are natural sprinters and very dangerous over short distances. This rune provides a 45% boost to speed at the base level for 18 seconds. If that wasn't cool enough, it also provides a good boost to melee attack at the same time. We also have the Rune of Slowness, causing enemies to lose 40% of their charge bonus, 45% of their charge speed, and 45% of their standard movement speed. This hex lasts for 30 seconds at the base level. To sweeten the deal, each of these runes can also be overcast, causing the master version of each to be unleashed. If we look at the new legendary lord Thorek, he has the Rune of Doom, which provides the entire army with a buff to melee attack, and makes them a source of fear for 16 seconds. This ability can turn your defensive front line into a death-dealing machine that can mow through your enemy's troops. Combine this with the Rune of Speed, and you have an extremely potent offensive force for a short period. I'm very much looking forward to mixing and matching runes on the battlefield. There are the multitude of runes that can be created in the reworked Forge, providing bonuses such as Stalk, Snipe, heat-seeking projectiles that can home in on targets, or bombardment spells such as the Master Rune of Immolation, which ignore armor. I'll admit, I was fearful when I heard that the FOC Lord was going to be a dwarf, and especially so when I learned it was Thorek, as I felt he deserved his own place in a Lord pack. However, the changes that are coming for the dwarves in the update certainly make up for the lack of any new units alongside Thorek, and I, as a lover of the Dawi, am really excited to play with them and these changes. So, what are your thoughts on the changes to the dwarfs in the pending update? Are you happy with what you have seen? With that, we come to the end. I'd like to thank you for watching and encourage you to leave a comment, like or dislike, as the engagement is what counts. Before I go, I'd like to do two things. Firstly, I'm going to plug my Hammer of Grungni mod for the Dwarfs. Version 1.1.1 is currently available on the Steam Workshop. It adds unique mechanics to each of the legendary lords already in the game, along with a rune-word forging mechanic available to all the playable dwarf factions. It's also compatible with Mixu's Karak Azul, Kataf's Cracker Drak, and Elon's Greybeard Prospector mods. If you're a fan of the Dawi and have not yet checked it out, then I'd encourage you to do so, as it can add some much needed variety to the Dwarven campaigns. A new version will be available after the release of the update, to include Thoric Ironbrow in the rune-word mechanics. Secondly, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons, whose continued support for the channel I'm very grateful for. Thanks to Hot Apple Pie, Cody Bonds, Alexander, and Solareth Magnetar. I'm Grey Tiger. Thanks again for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video.